Question 1. The evaluation methodology shows that Nexans is considering a significant acquisition. Which approach best ensures compliance with regulatory frameworks and ethical market practices during the announcement and integration phases of this acquisition? Option A. Conduct a comprehensive impact assessment covering financial, operational, and regulatory implications, and develop a strategic communication plan based on its findings. Option B. Focus solely on the financial synergies of the acquisition and communicate these benefits to the market. Option C. Delay the announcement until all integration details are finalized to ensure complete information is provided. Option D. Announce the acquisition immediately to gain a competitive advantage, with detailed impact analysis to follow. Correct answer is A. Conduct a comprehensive impact assessment covering financial, operational, and regulatory implications, and develop a strategic communication plan based on its findings. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Nexans, as a publicly listed company, operates under stringent regulatory frameworks designed to ensure transparency, fairness, and investor protection. The challenge lies in balancing the need for timely and accurate information dissemination with the potential for market manipulation or unfair advantage. A robust impact assessment is crucial to identify and mitigate risks associated with significant corporate events. The correct approach involves a comprehensive impact assessment that considers the potential effects of the proposed acquisition on Nexans' financial performance, operational structure, market position, and regulatory compliance obligations. This assessment should identify key stakeholders, analyze potential risks and opportunities, and inform the development of a strategic communication plan. By systematically evaluating these factors, Nexans can ensure that its disclosure practices align with regulatory requirements, such as those mandated by financial market authorities, and uphold ethical standards of market integrity. This proactive and thorough evaluation process is essential for responsible corporate governance and maintaining investor confidence. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the acquisition announcement without a thorough impact assessment. This could lead to incomplete or misleading disclosures, potentially violating regulations that require timely and accurate information to be provided to the market. Such a failure could result in regulatory penalties, reputational damage, and legal liabilities for Nexans. Another incorrect approach would be to focus solely on the financial benefits of the acquisition, while neglecting the operational and regulatory implications. This narrow focus could overlook critical integration challenges or compliance issues, leading to unforeseen problems and a failure to meet stakeholder expectations. Finally, an approach that prioritizes speed of announcement over accuracy and completeness would be professionally unsound, as it risks disseminating information that is not fully vetted, thereby undermining market confidence and potentially contravening disclosure obligations. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes due diligence, regulatory adherence, and ethical conduct. This involves a structured process of information gathering, risk analysis, and strategic planning. Before any significant corporate action, such as an acquisition, a comprehensive impact assessment should be conducted. This assessment should be informed by relevant legal and regulatory requirements, and its findings should guide the communication strategy and operational integration plans. Continuous monitoring and evaluation are also key to adapting to evolving circumstances and ensuring ongoing compliance. Question 2. The monitoring system demonstrates a need to analyze employee performance metrics to identify areas for operational improvement within Nexans. Which approach best balances the company's analytical objectives with its regulatory obligations regarding employee data privacy? Option A. Obtain explicit, informed consent from each employee for the monitoring system to access and analyze their raw performance data. Option B. Analyze the data in real time and immediately delete all records after each individual performance review is completed. Option C. Implement robust data anonymization or pseudonymization techniques before feeding data into the monitoring system for analysis. Option D. Conduct the analysis using raw, identifiable employee data, relying on internal policies to safeguard information. The correct answer is C. Implement robust data anonymization or pseudonymization techniques before feeding data into the monitoring system for analysis. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires Nexans' compliance team to balance the need for efficient data analysis with the stringent requirements of data privacy regulations. Misinterpreting or misapplying these regulations can lead to significant legal penalties, reputational damage, and loss of client trust. The challenge lies in identifying and mitigating risks associated with processing sensitive information, while ensuring that the monitoring system's insights are actionable and compliant. Careful judgment is required to determine the appropriate level of anonymization or pseudonymization without compromising the integrity of the data for its intended purpose. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves implementing robust data anonymization or pseudonymization techniques before the data is fed into the monitoring system for analysis. This aligns with the core principles of data protection regulations, such as the General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR. If this exam is jurisdictionally aligned with the EU or equivalent principles in other specified jurisdictions, these regulations mandate that personal data should be processed in a manner that ensures appropriate security, including protection against unauthorized or unlawful processing and against accidental loss, destruction, or damage, using appropriate technical or organizational measures. Anonymization or pseudonymization are key technical measures to de-identify data, thereby reducing the risk of individual identification and making the data less subject to strict data protection obligations, while still allowing for valuable trend analysis. This approach prioritizes privacy by design and by default, a fundamental tenet of data protection compliance. Incorrect approach is analysis, an approach that involves direct analysis of raw, identifiable employee data without any form of de-identification, poses a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This directly contravenes data protection principles that require minimizing the processing of personal data and ensuring its security. It exposes Nexans to risks of data breaches and unauthorized access to sensitive employee information, leading to potential fines and legal action under relevant data protection laws. An approach that relies solely on the consent of individual employees for the monitoring system's analysis, without implementing technical safeguards like anonymization, is also problematic. Consent can be a lawful basis for processing. It is often not sufficient on its own for extensive monitoring, especially in an employer-employee relationship where power imbalances can affect the voluntariness of consent. Furthermore, relying solely on consent does not inherently protect the data from misuse or breaches once collected, and it may not satisfy the principle of data minimization. An approach that involves deleting all data after a very short, arbitrary period, without considering the analytical needs or regulatory retention requirements, is inefficient and potentially non-compliant. While data minimization is important, data must be retained for as long as necessary for the purposes for which it is processed, and in accordance with any legal or regulatory obligations. Arbitrarily deleting data without a clear policy or justification could hinder legitimate business operations and compliance efforts, and may not align with data retention regulations. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a risk-based approach, prioritizing data protection by design and by default. This involves understanding the specific data being collected, its sensitivity, the purpose of its processing, and the relevant legal and regulatory obligations. Before implementing any monitoring system, a thorough data protection impact assessment (DPIA) should be conducted. This assessment should identify potential risks to individuals' rights and freedoms and outline measures to mitigate those risks. The decision-making process should involve legal counsel and data protection officers to ensure full compliance. The chosen method for data processing should always aim to achieve the business objective with the least intrusive means necessary, prioritizing the anonymization or pseudonymization of data wherever feasible. Question 3. The efficiency study reveals that Nexans' new manufacturing process in its European division is significantly underperforming compared to initial projections, potentially impacting profitability for the current fiscal year. What is the most appropriate immediate action for Nexans' management to take? Option A. Issue a brief statement acknowledging potential operational challenges without specifying the details of the efficiency study. Option B. Inform key institutional investors and financial analysts about the underperformance to manage their expectations proactively. Option C. Conduct a comprehensive internal review to determine the materiality of the findings and consult with legal and compliance to ensure adherence to disclosure regulations before any external communication. Option D. Delay any public announcement until the end of the fiscal year to avoid causing undue market volatility. The correct answer is C. Conduct a comprehensive internal review to determine the materiality of the findings and consult with legal and compliance to ensure adherence to disclosure regulations before any external communication. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Nexans, as a publicly listed company, is subject to stringent regulatory oversight regarding its financial reporting and disclosures. The efficiency study's findings, if material, could impact the company's financial performance and, consequently, investor confidence. The core challenge lies in balancing the need for timely and accurate disclosure with the potential for market disruption or misinterpretation of preliminary information. Careful judgment is required to determine the appropriate course of action, adhering strictly to the relevant regulatory framework. The correct approach involves a thorough internal review and consultation with legal and compliance departments to assess the materiality of the efficiency study's findings. If deemed material, Nexans must then follow the prescribed procedures for public disclosure, which typically involves issuing a press release or making a regulatory filing in accordance with the rules of the relevant stock exchange and securities regulators. This ensures transparency and fairness to all investors, preventing insider trading and maintaining market integrity. The regulatory justification stems from principles of fair disclosure and market abuse prevention, aiming to ensure that all market participants have access to the same material information simultaneously. An incorrect approach would be to selectively disclose the findings to a select group of stakeholders, such as major shareholders or analysts, before a public announcement. This constitutes selective disclosure and is a direct violation of fair disclosure regulations, potentially leading to accusations of insider trading and market manipulation. Another incorrect approach would be to ignore the findings altogether, especially if they indicate a significant deviation from previously communicated financial performance. This failure to disclose material information can result in regulatory penalties, reputational damage, and loss of investor trust. A third incorrect approach would be to release incomplete or misleading information to the market. This undermines the principle of accurate disclosure and can lead to significant legal and financial repercussions. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes regulatory compliance and ethical conduct. This involves 1. Identifying the potential impact of new information. 2. Assessing its materiality against established regulatory criteria. 3. Consulting with internal legal and compliance teams. 4. Following established protocols for disclosure, ensuring timeliness and fairness. 5. Documenting all decisions and actions taken. Question 4. Investigation of a significant contract opportunity for Nexans in a new market reveals that the client's procurement process appears to implicitly favor suppliers who can demonstrate a willingness to facilitate certain administrative aspects of the contract, which could be interpreted as a request for non-standard, potentially unethical payments or favors. How should the Nexans sales team proceed? Option A. Proceed with contract negotiation. Assuming facilitation refers to standard administrative support, and address any specific requests for non-standard payments or favors only if they arise directly and explicitly during later stages of the process. Option B. Instruct the Nexans legal and compliance departments to draft a set of flexible contractual clauses that can be used to accommodate the client's implicit requests for facilitation, without explicitly mentioning any unethical practices. Option C. Proactively engage with the client to understand their specific needs and concerns regarding facilitation. Clearly communicate Nexans' unwavering commitment to ethical business practices and compliance with all applicable anti-bribery and corruption laws, and explore mutually agreeable solutions that uphold these principles. Option D. Inform the client that Nexans cannot engage in any activities that deviate from its standard, transparent procurement and payment procedures, and if the client insists on their interpretation of facilitation, Nexans will withdraw from the opportunity. The correct answer is C. Proactively engage with the client to understand their specific needs and concerns regarding facilitation. Clearly communicate Nexans' unwavering commitment to ethical business practices and compliance with all applicable anti-bribery and corruption laws, and explore mutually agreeable solutions that uphold these principles. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for Nexans employees due to the inherent conflict between achieving business objectives and adhering to ethical conduct and regulatory compliance. The pressure to secure a significant contract can lead to a temptation to overlook or downplay potential ethical breaches. Careful judgment is required to ensure that the pursuit of business success does not compromise Nexans' integrity or expose the company to legal and reputational risks. The correct approach involves a proactive and transparent engagement with the potential client, clearly articulating Nexans' commitment to ethical business practices and compliance with all relevant regulations. This includes openly discussing any potential conflicts of interest or areas where Nexans' standard operating procedures might differ from the client's expectations, and seeking to find mutually agreeable solutions that uphold ethical standards. This approach is justified by the regulatory framework governing business conduct, which mandates honesty, integrity, and compliance. Specifically, it aligns with principles of good corporate governance and anti-bribery legislation that prohibit offering or accepting improper inducements. By addressing concerns upfront, Nexans demonstrates its commitment to transparency and ethical dealings, fostering trust and a sustainable business relationship. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the contract negotiations without fully disclosing the potential issues or attempting to conceal them. This could involve downplaying the significance of the identified concerns or making implicit promises that could be misconstrued as unethical inducements. Such actions would represent a failure to uphold the duty of care and integrity expected of employees. Ethically, it breaches the principle of honesty and could lead to a violation of anti-bribery and corruption laws if the undisclosed issues involve any form of improper advantage. Another incorrect approach would be to unilaterally alter Nexans' standard compliance procedures to accommodate the client's perceived expectations without proper internal review and approval. This bypasses established governance mechanisms and could expose Nexans to significant compliance risks, potentially violating internal policies and external regulations designed to prevent misconduct. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes ethical considerations and regulatory compliance. This involves 1. Identifying potential ethical or regulatory red flags. 2. Consulting relevant internal policies, codes of conduct, and legal counsel. 3. Openly and honestly communicating concerns with all relevant parties, including the client and internal stakeholders. 4. Seeking to find solutions that are compliant and ethically sound, even if they require more time or effort. 5. Documenting all discussions and decisions. Question 5. The audit findings indicate that certain Nexans sales representatives in a specific region have been making regular facilitation payments to local officials to expedite customs clearance for imported goods, a practice that may contravene the UK's Bribery Act 2010. What is the most appropriate immediate course of action for the Nexans Compliance Department? Option A. Immediately instruct all sales representatives in the region to cease all such payments and issue a formal warning regarding the Bribery Act, while initiating a detailed internal investigation into the nature and extent of these payments. Option B. Inform the sales representatives that, while these payments are not ideal, they are a necessary cost of doing business in that region and should continue as before. Option C. Advise the sales representatives to continue making the payments discreetly, while the compliance department researches whether such payments are considered acceptable under local business customs. Option D. Request the sales representatives to provide a list of all officials who have received payments, without explicitly stating the purpose of the request, to assess potential future business opportunities. The correct answer is A. Immediately instruct all sales representatives in the region to cease all such payments and issue a formal warning regarding the Bribery Act, while initiating a detailed internal investigation into the nature and extent of these payments. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for Nexans employees due to the inherent conflict between achieving business objectives and adhering to regulatory compliance. The audit findings highlight a potential gap in the company's adherence to the UK's Bribery Act 2010, specifically concerning the facilitation of business through improper payments. Navigating this requires a deep understanding of the Act's provisions, particularly Section 7, failure of commercial organizations to prevent bribery, and the company's own internal policies designed to mitigate such risks. The professional challenge lies in identifying and rectifying these issues without jeopardizing legitimate business relationships or creating new compliance risks. The correct approach involves a thorough, documented investigation into the specific audit findings, engaging with relevant internal departments, such as legal, compliance, and procurement, and implementing robust remedial actions. This includes understanding the nature of the payments, their purpose, and whether they fall within the scope of prohibited conduct under the Bribery Act. The justification for this approach is rooted in the proactive and diligent manner it addresses the identified risks, demonstrating Nexans' commitment to compliance and its efforts to prevent bribery. This aligns with the principles of the Bribery Act, which places a significant burden on commercial organizations to have adequate procedures in place to prevent bribery. An incorrect approach would be to dismiss the audit findings without proper investigation, assuming the payments were routine or insignificant. This failure to investigate would be a direct contravention of the duty of care expected of employees and the company under the Bribery Act. Another incorrect approach would be to attempt to conceal or downplay the findings to avoid scrutiny, which constitutes a serious ethical and legal breach. Furthermore, implementing superficial or undocumented remedial actions would not satisfy the adequate procedures defense under the Act and would leave Nexans vulnerable to future violations and reputational damage. Professionals should approach such situations by first acknowledging the seriousness of audit findings and the potential regulatory implications. A structured decision-making process involves 1. Understanding the specific allegations and relevant regulations. 2. Gathering all pertinent facts through a fair and thorough investigation. 3. Consulting with legal and compliance experts. 4. Developing and implementing proportionate and effective remedial actions. And 5. Ensuring ongoing monitoring and review to prevent recurrence. This systematic approach ensures that decisions are informed, defensible, and aligned with both legal obligations and ethical standards. Question 6. The assessment process reveals potential discrepancies in Nexans' recent financial reporting that may not fully align with the disclosure requirements under the UK Financial Conduct Authority (FCA) listing rules. Which of the following represents the most appropriate immediate course of action for Nexans' compliance team? Option A. Wait for a formal inquiry from the FCA before commencing any review or corrective actions to conserve internal resources. Option B. Advise relevant personnel to adjust the reporting figures to align with perceived market expectations without further investigation to avoid regulatory scrutiny. Option C. Initiate a comprehensive internal investigation led by the Compliance Department, involving relevant stakeholders, to ascertain the facts and determine the extent of any non-compliance while documenting all findings and actions. Option D. Immediately issue a public statement acknowledging potential reporting issues and outlining preliminary findings to ensure full transparency with the market. The correct answer is C. Initiate a comprehensive internal investigation led by the Compliance Department involving relevant stakeholders to ascertain the facts and determine the extent of any non-compliance while documenting all findings and actions. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Nexans, as a publicly listed company, operates under stringent regulatory requirements designed to ensure market integrity and investor protection. The assessment process has uncovered potential non-compliance, requiring a careful and informed response. The challenge lies in balancing the need for transparency with the potential for reputational damage and the legal implications of the findings. A robust and ethically sound approach is paramount to maintaining stakeholder trust and adhering to regulatory obligations. The correct approach involves a thorough, objective investigation into the identified discrepancies. This demonstrates a commitment to compliance and good corporate governance. By initiating a formal internal review, Nexans signals its seriousness in addressing potential issues and its adherence to principles of accountability. This process, when conducted diligently and documented appropriately, aligns with regulatory expectations for companies to proactively identify and rectify compliance breaches. It also provides a factual basis for any subsequent actions, whether that be remediation, disclosure, or disciplinary measures, all of which are guided by the relevant regulatory framework. An incorrect approach that involves immediate public disclosure without a thorough investigation risks misinforming stakeholders, potentially causing undue panic or reputational harm based on incomplete information. This could also lead to regulatory scrutiny for making unsubstantiated claims. Another incorrect approach, such as attempting to downplay or ignore the findings, represents a clear breach of ethical duties and regulatory obligations. This failure to address potential noncompliance can result in severe penalties, including fines, sanctions, and legal action, and erodes trust with investors and regulators. Furthermore, a reactive approach that involves only addressing the issue if directly confronted by regulators is a failure of proactive compliance and demonstrates a lack of commitment to maintaining a robust compliance culture. Professionals facing such situations should employ a structured decision-making process. This begins with acknowledging the findings and understanding the potential implications. The next step is to gather all relevant information and assess the nature and extent of the potential noncompliance. Based on this assessment, a plan for investigation and remediation should be developed, ensuring it is thorough, objective, and documented. Throughout this process, it is crucial to consult with legal and compliance experts to ensure adherence to all applicable regulations and ethical standards. Transparency with relevant stakeholders, at the appropriate time and in the appropriate manner, is also a key consideration. Question 7. When evaluating Nexans compliance procedures for new international supply chain initiative involving partners in multiple European countries, which approach best ensures adherence to the relevant regulatory framework and ethical standards? Option A. Applying Nexans' internal global compliance policy, assuming it meets the highest international standards, without specific review of each partner's national regulations. Option B. Identifying and adhering to the specific national regulatory frameworks of each European country involved in the supply chain initiative, and applying the most stringent requirements where conflicts arise, in conjunction with professional ethical guidelines. Option C. Prioritizing the regulatory framework of the country where Nexans headquarters is located, even if it is not the primary operational jurisdiction for this initiative. Option D. Relying solely on the compliance certifications provided by the international partners, without independent verification against Nexans' own standards or relevant jurisdictional laws. Correct answer is A. Applying Nexans' internal global compliance policy, assuming it meets the highest international standards, without specific review of each partner's national regulations. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Nexans, as a global company, must navigate varying regulatory landscapes while maintaining consistent ethical standards. The challenge lies in identifying and applying the correct regulatory framework when dealing with cross-border transactions or operations, ensuring compliance without compromising business objectives. Careful judgment is required to avoid legal repercussions, reputational damage, and potential financial penalties. The correct approach involves prioritizing the regulatory framework of the jurisdiction where the specific activity or transaction is taking place, or where Nexans has its primary operational presence for that activity, and adhering to the most stringent applicable standards if there is overlap or ambiguity. This ensures that Nexans operates within the legal boundaries of all relevant jurisdictions and upholds its commitment to ethical conduct. Specifically, for a company like Nexans operating in the UK, this would mean adhering to the Financial Conduct Authority (FCA) handbook, relevant UK legislation such as the Companies Act 2006, and any specific industry codes of conduct applicable to the cable manufacturing and energy sector. The CISI, Chartered Institute for Securities and Investment, guidelines also provide a strong ethical framework that complements regulatory requirements, emphasizing integrity, competence, and due care. An incorrect approach would be to assume that a single, overarching global policy is sufficient without considering specific jurisdictional requirements. This could lead to violations of local laws, such as data protection regulations, e.g., GDPR if operating in the EU, or anti-bribery laws, e.g., the Bribery Act 2010 in the UK, even if the global policy aims for high standards. Another incorrect approach is to apply the regulations of a jurisdiction where Nexans has a minimal presence or where the regulations are less stringent, as this would likely result in non-compliance in the primary operational jurisdiction. Furthermore, ignoring the ethical guidance provided by professional bodies like CISI, even if not strictly legally binding in all instances, can lead to a perception of poor corporate governance and erode trust. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying all relevant jurisdictions and their respective regulatory frameworks. This should be followed by a thorough assessment of the specific activity or transaction to determine which regulations are most pertinent. When faced with conflicting or overlapping regulations, the principle of applying the most stringent standard should be adopted. Regular training and updates on regulatory changes are crucial, and seeking legal counsel when in doubt is a prudent step to ensure comprehensive compliance and maintain ethical integrity. Question 8. Risk assessment procedures indicate that a new data privacy regulation has come into effect that may impact how Nexans can utilize historical client data during sales pitches for a significant upcoming contract. The sales team is eager to proceed with their established presentation methods, which involve referencing past project successes and client engagement metrics derived from this historical data. However, there is uncertainty within the team about the precise scope and application of the new regulation to their current sales practices. Which of the following actions should the Nexans sales team prioritize in this situation? Option A. Attempt to informally gather opinions from other industry professionals to gauge how they are adapting to similar regulations, rather than formally engaging Nexans compliance resources. Option B. Immediately consult with the Nexans Compliance Department to seek a definitive interpretation of the new data privacy regulation and its implications for their sales presentations before proceeding. Option C. Modify the sales presentation to remove all references to historical client data to avoid any potential regulatory scrutiny, even if it weakens the pitch. Option D. Proceed with the sales pitch using the historical data as planned, assuming the new regulation is unlikely to apply to standard sales and marketing activities. The correct answer is B. Immediately consult with the Nexans Compliance Department to seek a definitive interpretation of the new data privacy regulation and its implications for their sales presentations before proceeding. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for Nexans employees due to the inherent conflict between achieving business objectives and adhering to stringent regulatory requirements. The pressure to secure a significant contract can create an environment where shortcuts or misinterpretations of compliance procedures might seem appealing, but the potential consequences of non-compliance, including severe financial penalties, reputational damage, and legal repercussions, necessitate a rigorous and ethical approach. Careful judgment is required to balance commercial imperatives with the absolute priority of regulatory adherence. The correct approach involves proactively seeking clarification from the designated compliance department regarding the interpretation of the new data privacy regulations. This demonstrates a commitment to understanding and implementing the law correctly, rather than making assumptions or proceeding with potentially non-compliant actions. This approach aligns with the ethical duty of care and the regulatory obligation to ensure that Nexans operations, including its sales processes and data handling, are fully compliant with all applicable laws and guidelines. Specifically, it upholds the principle of know your obligations and the proactive management of compliance risks, which are fundamental to maintaining regulatory integrity. An incorrect approach that involves proceeding with the sales pitch without confirming the regulatory implications of using the client's historical data would be a significant ethical and regulatory failure. This demonstrates a disregard for compliance obligations and a potential violation of data privacy laws, which could lead to substantial fines and damage to Nexans' reputation. Another incorrect approach, such as attempting to interpret the regulations in a way that favors the immediate business objective, even if it stretches the boundaries of compliance, is also professionally unacceptable. This constitutes a form of willful blindness or a deliberate attempt to circumvent regulatory intent, exposing Nexans to undue risk and undermining the company's commitment to ethical conduct. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes understanding and adherence to regulatory frameworks. This involves 1. Identifying potential compliance risks. 2. Seeking expert guidance, e.g., from the compliance department or legal counsel when faced with ambiguity. 3. Documenting all compliance-related inquiries and decisions. 4. Ensuring that business objectives do not override regulatory requirements. 5. Fostering a culture where raising compliance concerns is encouraged and supported. Question 9. Analysis of how Nexans sales team should navigate a situation where a key decision-maker at a prospective client company subtly hints at a desire for facilitation payments to expedite the contract approval process, which could significantly boost Nexans' quarterly performance. Option A. Agree to the facilitation payments discreetly, framing them as necessary administrative costs to ensure timely processing of the contract, and instruct the finance department to process them as such. Option B. Inform the decision maker that while Nexans cannot offer direct payments, they could explore opportunities for future business partnerships or consultancy roles for the decision maker after their tenure at the current company. Option C. Politely but firmly decline any suggestion of facilitation payments, explaining that Nexans adheres to strict ethical guidelines and all business dealings must be transparent and compliant with anti-bribery regulations, and instead focus on presenting the value proposition of Nexans' offerings. Option D. Proceed with the contract negotiations as planned, but avoid any further discussion about the facilitation payments, hoping the issue will resolve itself without direct engagement. The correct answer is C. Politely but firmly decline any suggestion of facilitation payments, explaining that Nexans adheres to strict ethical guidelines and all business dealings must be transparent and compliant with anti-bribery regulations, and instead focus on presenting the value proposition of Nexans' offerings. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for Nexans employees due to the inherent conflict between achieving business objectives and adhering to ethical conduct and regulatory compliance. The pressure to secure a significant contract can tempt individuals to overlook or rationalize actions that might be questionable. Careful judgment is required to ensure that the pursuit of business success does not compromise Nexans' integrity or expose the company to legal or reputational risks. The correct approach involves prioritizing transparent and ethical engagement with potential clients, even if it means a slower or more uncertain path to securing the contract. This aligns with the principles of fair competition and anti-bribery legislation, which are fundamental in business dealings. Specifically, it upholds the spirit and letter of regulations that prohibit offering inducements or engaging in deceptive practices to gain an unfair advantage. By focusing on the merits of Nexans' products and services and maintaining open communication, employees demonstrate a commitment to ethical business practices and long-term sustainability, thereby protecting Nexans from potential penalties and reputational damage. An incorrect approach that involves offering undisclosed benefits or preferential treatment to influence the decision-making process is professionally unacceptable. This directly violates anti-bribery and corruption laws, which are designed to ensure a level playing field and prevent undue influence. Such actions can lead to severe legal consequences, including hefty fines and imprisonment for individuals involved, as well as significant reputational damage for Nexans. Another incorrect approach, which is to downplay or ignore potential ethical concerns to expedite the deal, demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a disregard for compliance obligations. This can result in the company inadvertently engaging in unethical or illegal activities, leading to unforeseen liabilities. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying potential ethical and regulatory risks associated with any business opportunity. This involves understanding the relevant laws and company policies, and critically evaluating the proposed actions. If any doubt arises regarding the appropriateness of a particular action, the professional should seek guidance from their compliance department or legal counsel before proceeding. The ultimate decision should always prioritize ethical conduct and regulatory adherence over short-term gains. Question 10. Risk assessment procedures indicate that Nexans' global operations involve processing client data across multiple jurisdictions with varying data privacy laws. To ensure consistent client data protection and confidentiality, which of the following approaches best aligns with regulatory expectations and ethical best practices for Nexans? Option A. Adopt a flexible approach where data protection measures are adjusted based on the perceived risk of enforcement actions in each jurisdiction. Option B. Implement a unified data protection policy that adheres to the strictest applicable regulations, such as the GDPR, across all global operations. Option C. Develop country-specific data protection policies that only meet the minimum legal requirements of each respective jurisdiction. Option D. Rely on individual client agreements to dictate data protection standards, overriding any internal Nexans policies if conflicts arise. The correct answer is B. Implement a unified data protection policy that adheres to the strictest applicable regulations, such as the GDPR, across all global operations. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Nexans, as a global company, must navigate the complexities of differing regulatory requirements and ethical expectations across various jurisdictions. The challenge lies in ensuring that the company's internal policies and procedures, particularly concerning data privacy and client confidentiality, are not only compliant with the strictest applicable regulations, but also uphold the highest ethical standards, even when operating in less stringent environments. A failure to do so could lead to significant legal penalties, reputational damage, and loss of client trust. The correct approach involves adopting a globally consistent, high-standard policy that aligns with the most stringent regulatory framework applicable to Nexans operations, which in this case would be the GDPR, given its comprehensive data protection provisions and extraterritorial reach. This proactive stance ensures that Nexans is not only compliant in all jurisdictions, but also sets a benchmark for data handling that protects its clients and stakeholders universally. This aligns with the ethical principle of treating all data subjects with respect and ensuring robust protection regardless of their location. An incorrect approach that prioritizes only the minimum legal requirements of each specific jurisdiction would be professionally unacceptable. This is because it creates a patchwork of compliance that is difficult to manage, prone to errors, and potentially leaves data vulnerable in regions with weaker protections. Such an approach would violate the spirit of data protection laws, which aim to safeguard individuals' privacy rights comprehensively. Furthermore, it could be seen as ethically negligent, as it knowingly exposes client data to higher risks in certain operating environments. Another incorrect approach, focusing solely on client requests without a robust internal framework, is also professionally unsound. While client satisfaction is important, it cannot supersede legal and ethical obligations. Uncritically accepting client instructions without assessing their compliance with data protection laws and ethical standards could lead Nexans into complicity with data misuse or breaches. This demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a failure to uphold the company's responsibility to protect data. Professionals should employ a risk-based decision-making framework. This involves identifying all relevant legal and ethical obligations, assessing the potential risks associated with different operational approaches, and selecting the option that provides the highest level of protection and compliance across all relevant jurisdictions. This framework emphasizes a proactive, principle-based approach rather than a reactive, minimum compliance strategy. Question 11. Risk assessment procedures indicate a potential for increased financial reporting scrutiny for Nexans' European subsidiaries due to recent changes in EU financial disclosure directives. A Nexans compliance officer is tasked with updating the internal risk assessment framework to reflect these changes. Which of the following actions best ensures Nexans' compliance with the updated directives? Option A. Relying on the previous year's risk assessment framework, as the fundamental principles of financial reporting are unlikely to have changed significantly. Option B. Adopting a risk assessment framework from a non-EU jurisdiction that Nexans has found to be effective in other areas of its operations. Option C. Consulting the specific text of the latest EU financial disclosure directives and engaging with Nexans' European legal and compliance teams to tailor the risk assessment framework accordingly. Option D. Implementing a standardized risk assessment template across all Nexans subsidiaries globally, assuming the core principles of financial reporting are universally applied. The correct answer is D. Implementing a standardized risk assessment template across all Nexans subsidiaries globally, assuming the core principles of financial reporting are universally applied. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Nexans, as a global company, must navigate the complexities of differing regulatory environments while maintaining consistent ethical standards. The challenge lies in identifying and applying the correct regulatory framework when dealing with a cross-border transaction or operation, ensuring compliance without compromising the integrity of the assessment. A failure to correctly identify the applicable jurisdiction's regulations could lead to significant legal penalties, reputational damage, and operational disruption. The correct approach involves a thorough understanding of the Nexans Group's internal policies on regulatory compliance and the specific legal and ethical obligations within the primary jurisdiction of the transaction or operation. This requires a proactive engagement with legal and compliance teams to confirm the applicable regulatory framework, before proceeding with the risk assessment. This ensures that the assessment is conducted in accordance with the laws and guidelines that govern Nexans' activities in that specific context, thereby upholding its commitment to legal and ethical conduct. An incorrect approach of applying a generic or outdated framework would be professionally unacceptable. This demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a failure to adhere to the principle of regulatory compliance, which is a cornerstone of responsible business practice. It could also lead to a flawed risk assessment, misidentification of risks, and ultimately, non-compliance with mandatory reporting or operational requirements specific to the relevant jurisdiction. Another incorrect approach would be to prioritize speed over accuracy by assuming the regulatory framework of a familiar jurisdiction applies without verification. This bypasses the critical step of jurisdictional analysis, which is essential for accurate risk assessment and compliance. It risks overlooking specific local requirements that could have significant implications for Nexans' operations and legal standing. Professionals should adopt a decision-making process that begins with clearly defining the scope and geographical context of the activity being assessed. This should be followed by consulting internal compliance resources and, if necessary, external legal counsel to definitively identify the applicable regulatory framework. The risk assessment should then be meticulously tailored to meet the specific requirements of that framework, ensuring all relevant legal and ethical considerations are addressed. Question 12. Research into the implementation of a new innovative financial service by Nexans in a specific jurisdiction reveals potential ambiguities in how existing regulations apply to its unique features. What is the most appropriate course of action for Nexans to ensure full regulatory compliance and mitigate potential risks? Option A. Engage in proactive consultation with the relevant regulatory authorities to seek clarification on the application of existing rules and to understand any specific requirements for the new service, potentially adjusting the service design based on their guidance. Option B. Rely solely on internal legal counsel's interpretation of the regulations without seeking external validation or direct engagement with the regulators, believing their expertise is sufficient. Option C. Delay the launch indefinitely until a completely new regulatory framework is established that explicitly addresses such innovative services, to avoid any possibility of non-compliance. Option D. Proceed with the launch of the service, assuming the existing regulatory framework implicitly covers the new features, and address any potential issues that arise post-launch. The correct answer is D. Proceed with the launch of the service, assuming the existing regulatory framework implicitly covers the new features, and address any potential issues that arise post-launch. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a company's desire to expand its market reach and the stringent regulatory requirements designed to protect investors and market integrity. Nexans, as a global entity, must navigate these regulations carefully to ensure compliance across all its operations. The challenge lies in balancing business objectives with legal and ethical obligations, particularly when introducing new financial products or services. Careful judgment is required to avoid missteps that could lead to regulatory sanctions, reputational damage, and loss of investor confidence. The correct approach involves a thorough and proactive engagement with the relevant regulatory bodies. This means not only understanding the existing rules, but also seeking clarification and guidance on how Nexans' proposed new service aligns with the spirit and letter of the law. This proactive stance demonstrates a commitment to compliance and can help identify potential issues early on, allowing for adjustments to the service design or implementation strategy. Regulatory approval, where required, is a critical step that validates the company's adherence to established standards. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the new service without adequate regulatory consultation or to misinterpret the regulatory framework. This could manifest as assuming existing regulations are sufficient without verifying their applicability to the novel aspects of the service. Such an assumption risks violating disclosure requirements, suitability rules, or other investor protection mandates. Another failure would be to prioritize speed to market over diligent compliance, leading to a rushed implementation that overlooks critical regulatory checkpoints. These failures can result in significant penalties, including fines, operational restrictions, and damage to Nexans' reputation as a responsible corporate citizen. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that begins with a comprehensive understanding of the regulatory landscape. This involves identifying all applicable laws, rules, and guidelines. Next, they should assess how the proposed business activity, in this case, a new service by Nexans, interacts with these regulations. If there is ambiguity or uncertainty, the framework dictates seeking expert legal and compliance advice and engaging proactively with regulators. The final step is to implement the service only after ensuring all regulatory requirements have been met and documented, prioritizing long-term compliance and ethical conduct over short-term gains. Question 13. Market research demonstrates a significant opportunity for Nexans to expand its operations into a new, emerging market. Before committing to a substantial investment in local manufacturing and distribution, Nexans must ensure its proposed market entry strategy fully complies with the regulatory framework of this specific jurisdiction. Which of the following approaches best ensures Nexans' adherence to local laws and ethical business practices during this expansion? Option A. Rely on Nexans' internal legal team's general knowledge of international business law to assess compliance, without engaging local experts or conducting specific jurisdictional research. Option B. Proceed with the investment based on successful market entry strategies used in other developed countries, assuming similar regulatory oversight. Option C. Initiate market entry with a minimal initial investment and monitor regulatory responses, adjusting operations as needed to comply with any identified local laws. Option D. Conduct a comprehensive review of the target jurisdiction's competition laws, consumer protection regulations, and any industry-specific guidelines, seeking local legal counsel to ensure full compliance before any commitments are made. Correct answer is B. Proceed with the investment based on successful market entry strategies used in other developed countries, assuming similar regulatory oversight. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Nexans, as a global company, must navigate varying regulatory landscapes while maintaining consistent ethical standards. The core difficulty lies in balancing the need for localized compliance with the overarching principles of corporate responsibility and market integrity. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any market entry strategy not only adheres to the letter of the law in the target jurisdiction, but also upholds Nexans' reputation and commitment to fair competition. The correct approach involves a thorough and proactive engagement with the specific regulatory framework of the target market, including competition law, consumer protection regulations, and any industry-specific guidelines. This means conducting detailed due diligence on local antitrust laws, understanding notification requirements for mergers or acquisitions, and assessing potential impacts on market concentration. Nexans must prioritize obtaining all necessary regulatory approvals and ensuring that its business practices align with the spirit of fair competition as defined by the local authorities. This approach is ethically sound and legally compliant, minimizing the risk of penalties, reputational damage, and disruption to business operations. An incorrect approach would be to assume that practices permissible in one jurisdiction are automatically acceptable in another. For instance, proceeding with market entry without a comprehensive review of the target country's competition laws would be a significant regulatory failure. This could lead to violations of antitrust regulations, resulting in substantial fines, legal challenges, and the potential unwinding of the transaction. Another failure would be to overlook local consumer protection laws, which could expose Nexans to claims of unfair or deceptive practices, damaging customer trust and brand image. Furthermore, adopting a wait-and-see attitude towards regulatory compliance, hoping to address issues only if they arise, demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a disregard for the legal obligations of operating within a new market. This reactive stance is ethically questionable, as it prioritizes expediency over responsible corporate citizenship. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a comprehensive understanding of the target jurisdiction's legal and regulatory environment. This involves consulting with local legal counsel and regulatory experts. The next step is to assess the proposed business strategy against these regulations, identifying potential risks and compliance gaps. Mitigation strategies should then be developed and implemented before any market entry or significant operational changes occur. Continuous monitoring and adaptation to evolving regulatory landscapes are also crucial components of this framework, ensuring ongoing compliance and ethical conduct. Question 14. Comparative studies suggest that the most effective strategies for implementing new data privacy policies within large multinational corporations like Nexans involve a careful balance of operational efficiency and regulatory adherence. Considering the potential for significant penalties and reputational damage associated with non-compliance, which of the following implementation approaches would best align with robust data protection principles and ensure sustained compliance for Nexans? Option A. A reactive approach, delaying full implementation until specific data privacy incidents or regulatory inquiries necessitate immediate action. Option B. A simultaneous, company-wide implementation of all new data privacy policies across all departments to ensure uniform application from day one. Option C. A phased rollout of new data privacy policies, prioritizing the most sensitive data categories and critical business processes first, with ongoing monitoring and adaptation. Option D. An implementation strategy that focuses exclusively on deploying new technical security measures, assuming these will inherently address all data privacy concerns. The correct answer is C. A phased rollout of new data privacy policies, prioritizing the most sensitive data categories and critical business processes first, with ongoing monitoring and adaptation. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for Nexans employees regarding the implementation of new data privacy policies. The challenge lies in balancing the need for efficient data processing to support business operations with the stringent requirements of data protection regulations. Employees must navigate potential conflicts between departmental goals and the legal obligations to protect personal data, ensuring that any implementation strategy is compliant and ethically sound. This requires careful judgment to avoid both operational disruptions and regulatory breaches. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a phased implementation of the new data privacy policies, prioritizing the most sensitive data categories and critical business processes first. This strategy is justified by regulatory frameworks such as the General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR. Assuming this is the relevant jurisdiction for the Nexans hiring assessment test, as it is a common global standard for data privacy. GDPR mandates a risk-based approach to data protection, requiring organizations to identify and mitigate risks to data subjects' rights and freedoms. A phased rollout allows Nexans to concentrate resources on high-risk areas, conduct thorough impact assessments, and ensure adequate technical and organizational measures are in place before processing less sensitive data. This approach minimizes the risk of widespread noncompliance and protects individuals' data effectively. Incorrect approach is analysis. Implementing the new policies across all departments simultaneously without prioritization is an incorrect approach. This could lead to overwhelming resources, rushed implementation, and a higher likelihood of errors and non-compliance, particularly with sensitive data. It fails to adhere to the risk-based principles often embedded in data protection laws, which require a focus on the most critical areas first. Adopting a wait-and-see attitude, delaying implementation until specific issues arise or enforcement actions occur, is also incorrect. This passive approach is a clear violation of regulatory obligations to proactively implement data protection measures. It exposes Nexans to significant legal penalties, reputational damage, and a loss of trust from customers and stakeholders. Focusing solely on technical solutions without considering the human element and organizational processes is another incorrect approach. Data privacy is not just a technical issue. It requires changes in employee behavior, training, and established workflows. Neglecting these aspects means that even technically sound systems can be undermined by human error or procedural gaps, leading to non-compliance. Professional reasoning. Professionals at Nexans should adopt a structured, risk-aware approach to policy implementation. This involves 1. Understanding the specific regulatory requirements applicable to Nexans operations. 2. Conducting a comprehensive data inventory and mapping data flows to identify sensitive data categories. 3. Performing data protection impact assessments (DPIA) for high-risk processing activities. 4. Developing a phased implementation plan that prioritizes high-risk areas. 5. Ensuring adequate training and awareness programs for all relevant personnel. 6. Establishing clear internal controls and monitoring mechanisms to ensure ongoing compliance. 7. regularly reviewing and updating policies and procedures in light of evolving regulations and business needs. Question 15. Operational review demonstrates that Nexans is expanding its digital client interaction platforms across multiple European countries, each with its own data privacy laws. To ensure compliance and maintain client trust, what is the most appropriate implementation strategy for Nexans' new data handling protocols for these platforms? Option A. Rely on the existing global data handling policies of Nexans, assuming they are sufficient to cover the new digital platforms without specific country-by-country legal review. Option B. Delegate the responsibility for developing and implementing data handling protocols entirely to the local IT teams in each country, without centralized oversight or a unified standard. Option C. Develop separate data handling protocols for each country, aligning only with the minimum legal requirements of each respective jurisdiction to streamline implementation. Option D. Implement a unified data handling protocol that adheres to the most stringent data protection regulations found across all relevant European jurisdictions, ensuring a consistent high standard of privacy and security. Correct answer is D. Implement a unified data handling protocol that adheres to the most stringent data protection regulations found across all relevant European jurisdictions, ensuring a consistent high standard of privacy and security. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Nexans, as a global entity, must navigate the complexities of differing regulatory environments while maintaining a consistent ethical standard. The core challenge lies in ensuring that any new operational procedure, particularly one impacting data handling and client interactions, adheres strictly to the most stringent applicable regulations without creating operational inefficiencies or legal loopholes. Careful judgment is required to balance global consistency with local compliance. The correct approach involves proactively identifying the most stringent data protection and client confidentiality regulations that apply to Nexans operations in all relevant jurisdictions, and implementing a unified policy that meets or exceeds these standards. This demonstrates a commitment to the highest ethical and legal obligations, safeguarding client data and maintaining trust. Specifically, this aligns with principles of robust data governance and a proactive compliance culture, which are often mandated by regulations like the GDPR, if applicable to the exam's jurisdiction, or similar comprehensive data protection laws. By adopting the highest standard, Nexans ensures that it is not only compliant in every market, but also sets a benchmark for responsible business conduct. An incorrect approach of adopting the lowest common denominator of regulatory requirements would be professionally unacceptable. This would expose Nexans to significant legal and reputational risks, as it would likely fall short of the standards required in more regulated markets, leading to potential fines, lawsuits, and loss of client confidence. It demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a disregard for the spirit of data protection and client confidentiality laws. Another incorrect approach of relying solely on local legal counsel without a centralized oversight mechanism is also flawed. While local expertise is crucial, it can lead to fragmented and potentially conflicting policies across different regions. This can create compliance gaps and make it difficult to enforce a consistent ethical standard, undermining the company's overall risk management strategy. Finally, an incorrect approach of assuming existing policies are sufficient without a thorough review against evolving regulations would be negligent. Regulatory landscapes are dynamic, and outdated policies can quickly become non-compliant, exposing the company to unforeseen liabilities. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes a comprehensive risk assessment, identifies all applicable regulatory frameworks, and mandates the adoption of the most stringent standard across all operations. This should be supported by regular training, clear communication channels for compliance concerns, and a commitment to continuous improvement in policy and procedure. Question 16. Regulatory review indicates that Nexans is implementing a new global policy for handling customer data. While the policy is designed to meet the stringent requirements of the General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, it is unclear whether this single policy adequately addresses the specific data privacy laws and enforcement priorities in all other jurisdictions where Nexans operates, such as the California Consumer Privacy Act, CCPA, in the United States and Brazil's Lei Geral de Proteção de Dados, LGPD. Which approach should Nexans adopt to ensure robust compliance and mitigate legal and reputational risks? Option A. Rely solely on the legal teams in each local subsidiary to interpret and apply the new global policy to their specific regulatory environments, without central oversight or standardized adaptation guidelines. Option B. Conduct a detailed, jurisdiction-specific analysis of all applicable data privacy laws and tailor the implementation of the new data handling policy to meet the unique legal obligations and enforcement priorities of each country where Nexans operates. Option C. Adopt a least common denominator approach, creating a policy that meets the minimum data privacy standards across all relevant jurisdictions to simplify implementation and reduce compliance burden. Option D. Implement the GDPR-compliant policy globally, assuming its comprehensive nature will satisfy all other jurisdictions' requirements and provide general awareness training to all employees. The correct answer is D. Implement the GDPR-compliant policy globally, assuming its comprehensive nature will satisfy all other jurisdictions' requirements and provide general awareness training to all employees. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Nexans, as a global company, must navigate differing regulatory interpretations and enforcement priorities across its operating jurisdictions. The core difficulty lies in balancing the need for consistent internal policy with the imperative to comply with specific, potentially divergent, local legal requirements. A robust compliance program requires proactive identification of these differences and the development of adaptable strategies, rather than a one-size-fits-all approach. Careful judgment is required to ensure that, while striving for global uniformity, local nuances that carry significant legal weight are not overlooked. The correct approach involves a detailed, jurisdiction-specific analysis of Nexans' obligations under the relevant data privacy laws in each country where it operates. This means understanding the nuances of consent requirements, data subject rights, and breach notification procedures as defined by local legislation. By tailoring the implementation of the new data handling policy to align with these specific legal frameworks, Nexans ensures not only compliance, but also demonstrates a commitment to respecting the data privacy rights of individuals within each jurisdiction. This proactive, granular approach minimizes legal risk and builds trust. An incorrect approach would be to assume that a single, globally standardized policy, even if compliant in one major jurisdiction, will automatically satisfy the requirements of all others. For instance, relying solely on the GDPR framework without considering the specific nuances of, say, California's CCPA or Brazil's LGPD would be a significant regulatory failure. This could lead to non-compliance, resulting in fines, reputational damage, and legal action. Another incorrect approach would be to adopt a least common denominator policy, which might be technically compliant everywhere, but fails to leverage the stronger protections offered in certain jurisdictions, potentially missing opportunities to enhance data privacy beyond minimum legal requirements and thus not fully meeting ethical expectations. A third incorrect approach would be to delegate the entire responsibility to local legal teams without providing them with clear global guidelines and oversight, risking inconsistent application and potential gaps in compliance. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a comprehensive mapping of all relevant jurisdictions and their applicable data privacy laws. This should be followed by a gap analysis comparing Nexans' existing or proposed global policy against these local requirements. The next step involves developing a flexible implementation plan that allows for necessary local adaptations, supported by clear communication and training for relevant personnel in each region. Regular review and updates to this framework are crucial to adapt to evolving legal landscapes. Question 17. Consider a scenario where Nexans is facing significant pressure to reduce operational costs in its European manufacturing facilities. A proposal emerges to streamline waste disposal processes by consolidating waste streams from different production lines, potentially leading to substantial savings. However, there is a concern that this consolidation might inadvertently mix waste materials that, if combined, could create unforeseen environmental hazards or violate specific waste management regulations within the European Union. What is the most appropriate course of action for Nexans management to take in this situation? Option A. Delegate the decision-making authority to the plant managers of the individual facilities, allowing them to implement cost-saving measures as they deem fit, provided they stay within their allocated budgets. Option B. Proceed with the waste consolidation immediately to achieve the projected cost savings, assuming that minor deviations from standard procedures are acceptable during periods of financial strain. Option C. Implement the waste consolidation on a trial basis in one facility and observe for any immediate negative environmental impacts before rolling it out to other facilities. Option D. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment and consult with environmental compliance experts and legal counsel to ensure the proposed waste consolidation fully adheres to all relevant EU environmental regulations and internal Nexans sustainability policies before implementation. The correct answer is B. Proceed with the waste consolidation immediately to achieve the projected cost savings, assuming that minor deviations from standard procedures are acceptable during periods of financial strain. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a company's immediate financial pressures and its long-term ethical and regulatory obligations. Nexans, as a global entity, must navigate complex compliance landscapes, and decisions made under duress can have significant repercussions. The core of the challenge lies in balancing the need for cost saving with the imperative to uphold integrity and adhere to established standards. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any implemented solution does not compromise safety, environmental responsibility, or legal standing. The correct approach involves a thorough, documented review of all potential cost-saving measures against the backdrop of relevant regulations and internal Nexans policies. This includes engaging with legal and compliance departments to assess the regulatory implications of any proposed changes. The justification for this approach is rooted in the principle of lawful conduct and corporate responsibility. Specifically, it aligns with general principles of corporate governance that mandate adherence to all applicable laws and regulations, and ethical frameworks that prioritize transparency and due diligence. For Nexans, this would mean consulting its internal compliance manuals and any relevant industry-specific regulations applicable to its operations in the jurisdiction of the assessment. An incorrect approach would be to implement cost-saving measures without adequate regulatory scrutiny. This could lead to violations of environmental protection laws, health and safety regulations, or contractual obligations, resulting in fines, reputational damage, and potential legal action. Another incorrect approach would be to prioritize short-term financial gains over long-term sustainability and ethical considerations, potentially by cutting corners on quality control or employee training, which could lead to product defects or workplace accidents, both of which have severe regulatory and ethical implications. A third incorrect approach would be to rely on informal advice or assumptions about regulatory compliance, rather than seeking formal guidance from legal and compliance experts. This bypasses established internal controls and increases the risk of unintentional noncompliance. Professionals in such situation should employ a structured decision-making process. This involves 1. Clearly defining the problem and the objectives. 2. Identifying all relevant stakeholders and their interests. 3. Gathering comprehensive information, including regulatory requirements and internal policies. 4. Evaluating potential solutions against these requirements and ethical principles. 5. Documenting the decision-making process and the rationale behind the chosen course of action. 6. Seeking expert advice from legal, compliance, and relevant technical departments. 7. Implementing the chosen solution with ongoing monitoring and review. Question 18. Risk assessment procedures indicate that Nexans' global data privacy compliance framework needs to be updated to reflect evolving regulatory requirements and best practices. Considering the diverse legal and operational environments across its international subsidiaries, which of the following approaches best ensures robust and consistent data protection while remaining practical for local implementation? Option A. Delegate the entire responsibility for data privacy compliance to each individual subsidiary's local legal counsel, with no overarching global policy or standard. Option B. Implement a single, uniform global data privacy policy that dictates specific procedures for all subsidiaries, without allowing for any local modifications to ensure absolute consistency. Option C. Adopt a global data privacy framework based on the lowest common denominator of regulatory requirements across all operating jurisdictions to minimize compliance burden. Option D. Develop a global minimum data privacy standard that exceeds the requirements of the most stringent applicable regulations, and empower local teams to implement this standard, allowing for necessary local adaptations that do not compromise the overall protection level. Correct answer is D. Develop a global minimum data privacy standard that exceeds the requirements of the most stringent applicable regulations, and empower local teams to implement this standard, allowing for necessary local adaptations that do not compromise the overall protection level. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because Nexans, as a global company, must navigate varying regulatory landscapes while maintaining consistent ethical standards. The core difficulty lies in balancing the need for a unified compliance framework with the practicalities of local implementation and the potential for differing interpretations of regulatory intent. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any chosen approach not only meets the letter of the law in each jurisdiction, but also upholds the spirit of compliance and ethical conduct expected of a reputable organization. The correct approach involves establishing a global minimum standard for data privacy that exceeds the requirements of the most stringent applicable regulations, and then allowing local teams to implement this standard, adapting to specific local nuances where necessary, provided these adaptations do not weaken the overall protection. This is the best professional practice because it proactively mitigates risk by setting a high baseline, ensuring that Nexans operations are compliant across all jurisdictions, even those with less developed data privacy laws. This aligns with ethical principles of responsible data stewardship and demonstrates a commitment to protecting personal information universally, thereby building trust with customers and stakeholders. It also reflects a robust approach to risk management, anticipating potential future regulatory changes. An incorrect approach that relies solely on the lowest common denominator of regulatory requirements across all jurisdictions would be professionally unacceptable. This is because it would expose Nexans to significant legal and reputational risks in jurisdictions with stricter data privacy laws, potentially leading to fines, litigation, and loss of customer confidence. It fails to meet the ethical obligation to protect personal data to a reasonable standard, regardless of local legal minimums. Another incorrect approach, which is to implement a single, rigid global policy without any local adaptation, would also be professionally flawed. While seemingly ensuring uniformity, it fails to acknowledge the specific legal obligations and cultural contexts of different regions. This rigidity could lead to non-compliance in certain jurisdictions, where local laws mandate specific procedures or disclosures that are not covered by the global policy, or conversely, impose requirements that are unnecessarily burdensome or impractical locally. This demonstrates a lack of understanding of the practical application of compliance frameworks and can lead to operational inefficiencies and unintended breaches. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a thorough understanding of all applicable regulations in every jurisdiction where Nexans operates. This includes identifying the most stringent requirements and using them as a baseline. A risk-based approach should then be applied, considering the potential impact of non-compliance and the likelihood of breaches. Engaging local legal and compliance experts is crucial to ensure that global policies are effectively translated into local practices that are both compliant and operationally feasible. Continuous monitoring and updating of policies and procedures are also essential to adapt to evolving regulatory landscapes and emerging risks. Question 19. The investigation demonstrates that a Nexans sales representative, aiming to secure a significant contract with a foreign government entity, was informed by a local intermediary that a substantial facilitation fee would be required to expedite the approval process. The representative is aware that such fees are often a euphemism for bribes and could violate anti-corruption laws and Nexans' internal policies. What is the most appropriate course of action for the Nexans sales representative in this situation? Option A. Report the intermediary's request for a facilitation fee to Nexans' compliance department immediately and await their guidance before proceeding. Option B. Proceed with the contract negotiation, assuming the facilitation fee is a legitimate business expense, and discreetly try to verify its legality. Option C. Accept the offer of the facilitation fee and include it in the contract to ensure the deal is secured quickly. Option D. Inform the intermediary that Nexans does not pay facilitation fees and withdraw from the contract negotiation without further internal consultation. The correct answer is A. Report the intermediary's request for a facilitation fee to Nexans Compliance Department immediately and await their guidance before proceeding. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for Nexans employees due to the inherent conflict between achieving business objectives and adhering to ethical conduct and regulatory compliance. The pressure to secure a significant contract can tempt individuals to overlook or downplay potential ethical breaches, making careful judgment and a robust ethical framework paramount. The complexity arises from balancing the company's commercial interests with its legal and ethical obligations, particularly when dealing with third parties who may operate under different standards. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a proactive and transparent engagement with the compliance department. This demonstrates a commitment to upholding Nexans' ethical standards and regulatory obligations by seeking guidance before any potentially problematic action is taken. Specifically, reporting the offer of a facilitation fee to the compliance team triggers the company's established procedures for assessing and managing risks related to anti-bribery and corruption. This aligns with the principles of due diligence and integrity expected under relevant anti-corruption laws and internal Nexans policies, ensuring that the company does not engage in or condone illicit payments. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves accepting the offer and proceeding with the contract without further inquiry. This is a direct violation of anti-bribery and corruption regulations, which prohibit offering, promising, or giving anything of value to a public official or a third party to influence a decision. It also breaches Nexans' internal code of conduct, which likely mandates reporting such offers. This approach exposes Nexans to severe legal penalties, reputational damage, and potential debarment from future contracts. Another incorrect approach is to proceed with the contract while discreetly attempting to understand the nature of the facilitation fee without involving the compliance department. This is problematic because it creates an environment of secrecy and circumvention of established compliance protocols. It fails to provide the necessary oversight and risk assessment that only the compliance function can offer. Such an approach can be interpreted as an attempt to conceal a potential violation, thereby undermining trust and accountability within the organization. A third incorrect approach is to reject the offer outright and abandon the contract negotiation without any internal reporting or consultation. While rejecting a potentially illicit offer is commendable, failing to report it to the compliance department means that Nexans misses an opportunity to investigate the offer, understand the risks associated with the counterparty, and potentially strengthen its compliance defenses. It also fails to leverage the expertise of the compliance team in navigating such complex situations. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such situations should adopt a framework that prioritizes ethical conduct and regulatory compliance. This involves 1. Recognizing potential red flags, e.g., unusual fee requests. 2. Consulting internal policies and procedures. 3. Seeking guidance from the compliance or legal department before taking any action. 4. Documenting all communications and decisions. 5. Acting with integrity and transparency, even when faced with commercial pressure. This systematic approach ensures that business decisions are made within legal and ethical boundaries, protecting both the individual and the organization. Question 20. The analysis reveals that Nexans is planning a strategic market entry into a new region, which will involve collecting and processing candidate data for recruitment purposes. A key challenge identified is ensuring that this data collection and processing strictly adheres to the regulatory framework specified for the Nexans hiring assessment test, particularly concerning data privacy and fair employment practices, without compromising the efficiency of the hiring process. Option A. Rely on the existing global data handling policies of Nexans, assuming they are sufficient for the new region, and proceed with candidate data collection immediately to expedite the hiring process. Option B. Delegate the entire responsibility for ensuring regulatory compliance to the local HR team in the new region, without providing them with specific guidance or resources related to the Nexans hiring assessment test's regulatory framework. Option C. Implement a comprehensive data privacy impact assessment and establish clear data retention policies aligned with the Nexans hiring assessment test's regulatory framework before commencing any candidate data collection. Option D. focus solely on the technical aspects of data security, such as encryption, and overlook the legal and ethical considerations of data collection and consent as defined by the Nexans hiring assessment test regulatory framework. The correct answer is C. Implement a comprehensive data privacy impact assessment and establish clear data retention policies aligned with the Nexans hiring assessment test regulatory framework before commencing any candidate data collection. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for Nexans employees due to the inherent conflict between achieving business objectives and adhering to stringent regulatory requirements, particularly concerning data privacy and market integrity. The need to balance competitive advantage with legal and ethical obligations demands careful judgment. The correct approach involves proactively identifying and mitigating potential regulatory risks associated with the new market entry strategy. This entails conducting thorough due diligence, engaging legal and compliance teams early, and implementing robust data handling protocols that align with the Nexans hiring assessment tests specified regulatory framework. This approach is professionally sound because it prioritizes compliance, minimizes legal exposure, and upholds ethical standards by respecting data privacy and fair competition, thereby safeguarding Nexans' reputation and operational continuity. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the market entry without adequate regulatory review, assuming that existing general business practices are sufficient. This fails to acknowledge the specific, potentially unique, regulatory landscape of the target market and the sensitive nature of the data being handled. Such an oversight could lead to significant fines, reputational damage, and legal action for violating data protection laws and market conduct regulations. Another incorrect approach is to delegate the entire responsibility for regulatory compliance to a single department without cross-functional collaboration. This can result in fragmented understanding of risks and a lack of integrated solutions. Effective compliance requires a holistic view, involving input from legal, IT, sales, and operations to ensure all aspects of the market entry strategy are compliant. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to prioritize speed to market over thoroughness in regulatory assessment. While efficiency is important, cutting corners on compliance can have far more detrimental long-term consequences than a slightly delayed launch. Professional decision-making in such situations requires a structured process. First, clearly define the regulatory obligations relevant to the specific activity. Second, assess the potential risks of noncompliance. Third, develop and implement mitigation strategies. And fourth, establish ongoing monitoring and review mechanisms. This systematic approach ensures that business objectives are pursued responsibly and ethically.